It is my great and humble pleasure to welcome you to the Survey of India Conference 2014. I especially want to thank Mr. Tarun Vijay, Member of Parliament, for being here, as well as Dr. Subha Rao, and of course, Dr. S.P.S. Bakshi and Kaushik Chakrabarty. Thank you very much for being here. And I also want to greatly thank our sponsors, for without whom this event could not take place. So let me say that this conference is as much about surveying as it is about investment in infrastructure. The growth of the world's economies are intrinsically tied to developing new roads and bridges and other forms of transportation that make it possible to link people with jobs. In that regard, India certainly has demonstrated this quite completely, especially over the last decade since I have been coming to India, and certainly since my first visit to India in 1979. And even since I have been here in Delhi over the last few days, I've been reading about the possibility of more flyovers, the possibility of road widening projects, and of course, more investment in the Indian railway system. So we are very pleased here that we are able to hold this event. We're also at a very important part in our development and evolution of mapping, GIS, and in surveying technology. The tools we are using are becoming much more connected, and they must interoperate more completely if we are to be efficient in our profession. In particular, surveying provides the foundation, and GIS provides the analysis. But here is where the true revolution in location technology is headed. So I want to touch very briefly on 5 areas that I think are important. Unmanned aerial systems. The future of mapping and surveying is evolving to include information captured by these semi-autonomous vehicles. UAVs are sent aloft and can, in a relatively short period of time, capture data, create a 3D accurate map. The ability to capture and update information in near real time is significant. Already, we see how UAVs are connected immediately to mapping software to create precision terrain models, and then it's a very short leap from taking those 3D terrain models to 3D printers, so that within an hour of launching a UAV, we have a very accurate 3D land surface model in our hands. The second point is laser scanning. Obviously, we have many exhibitors here in laser scanning. 3D laser scanners can be used to create 3D building models and bridge models that can be imported into a GIS system or even to something like Google Earth to give 3D perspective to what was before 2D, two-dimensional data. The connectivity between devices doesn't stop there. As you know very well, we have cars driving the streets that are capturing street view data and LiDAR data that was never before in a digital form. We call this born analog data. That is the data that once was never existed or never thought to be in a digital form, but now is in a digital form. What are we going to do with all of this data? We have what has been called a big data problem. So that is the third thing I want to touch on, and that is big data. This is a very nebulous term that is being thrown around somewhat haphazardly, but in truth, it is one of our biggest challenges in geospatial technology. The problem lies not in the inability to process the data. We can process the information very timely, but it's the information that we must extract from the big data that intrinsically becomes very useful to us. The fourth thing is the commercialization of space and remote sensing. Last week, Spot 7 from Airbus Defence was sent aloft on the Indian Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. The payload completes the Spot 6 and 7 constellation. But on board the Indian PSLV were 5 other what we call small satellites, or small sats. These small sats are similar to those launched by other small commercial startup companies like Skybox and others, with the intent to complete Earth observation coverage with much more data and much more potential to do analysis of the data. So the potential is not so much in collecting the individual data, but on the interpretation and integration of data. That is what each of these small startup companies is aspiring to achieve. They don't want to be just a data company. They want to and aspire to be an information company. The last thing I will touch on is something called open source and open data. Perhaps we should call this the democratization of GIS. We in the United States have debated how data that is collected with taxpayer money should be distributed freely. This is a great debate. What we hope is that by distributing data more freely, we lead to estimates of 5 times the return on investment that is allowing commerce and private industry to contribute back to the government in the way of additional taxes. Open source software is perhaps best characterized as contributing to technology advancement in an open and free environment. But we must remember that in the end, open source software is just software. And like every other piece of software, it must be maintained and improved, and that is obviously a cost. So while it must be free to acquire it, we still have to have the resources to maintain it. We have here a very wonderful exhibition. Be thinking not only how these devices that you see in the exhibition stands are used by geospatial professionals, but also perhaps how is the data and information used by those not in our profession. We must help policymakers and politicians to understand the applications and potential of surveying, mapping, and location technology. So I bid you a very successful event, and I look forward to seeing you and working with you over the next 2 days. Thank you very much.